In this video, I will tell you all you need to know why buying a house in 2024 is not a good idea. According to CBRE research, the premium of buying a house versus renting in the US stands at 52%, which is the highest on record since 1996. The 52%, moreover, does not include the cost of repairs, maintenance and insurance. So in principle, the home ownership is even more expensive compared to renting. The highest this number was recorded was in 2006 at 33%, and that was at the peak of speculative frenzy. So even though there's no speculation right now, there's still renting is a much more attractive option compared to home ownership right now. Let's delve into factors and different numbers that stand behind this trend. I will also look at the things that can signal the improved affordability for buying a house. Whenever I want to understand a certain market, I always look at the supply and demand sides. The rental and home ownership markets are somewhat distinct and different because there are different factors and preferences that drive supply and demand. But at the same time, they're like substitutes. What I mean by substitutes, if a renter perceives his rent as too high, he can switch to being a homeowner, and vice versa. If a homeowner perceives his mortgage as too high, he can switch to becoming a renter. And in a ideal world, the equilibrium price in these markets, which is mortgage or rent, they should both roughly equal each other. But in the real world, this rarely happens so, because there are different constraints, preferences that drive the demand and supply, and mortgage is rarely equal to rent. From the figure 1, we see that buying a house was the best decision from 2010 through roughly 2018. Let's think about that for a minute. Conditions for home ownership were mildly favorable during that time. The biggest contributing factor was a very low mortgage rate by historic standards. The average interest rate on a new mortgage was below 3 to 4%. Compare this to pre-2008 era, where it was common for the mortgage rate to be 6 to 7%. Right now, the mortgage rate has reached 8%. That hurts a lot, especially new home buyers on a budget. To understand why the interest rate matters, let's take a look at a simple mortgage calculator. Assume an average median price of $414,000, average down payment of 14%, and interest rate of 8%. This makes the monthly mortgage payment $3,238. Now, keep everything else constant and change interest rate to the 4%. The mortgage payment plummets to $2,325. With a median monthly household income of $6,215, the debt-to-income ratio changes to 52.1%. Most banks will not qualify mortgages with debt-to-income ratios above 50%. The second factor was the post-COVID demand shock. It's not a secret that the demand for single-home units shot up since 2020. Everyone wanted to own a house due to government lockdowns. And this also coincided with the household formation for millennials. According to Fannie Mae and Rental Cafe calculations, the home ownership among millennials grew from 33% in 2009 to 52% in 2023. The average age of a millennial buying a house stood at 34 years in 2020, and this buying age, is much lower compared to earlier generations. So as we can see that the home ownership rate among millennials, which is 52%, still has a lot of room to catch up to the national average of 66%. Bidding wars and buying houses with cash without inspections caused rapid price increases. This makes the American dream of home ownership unreachable for many. The housing price growth outstripped median wage growth by a wide margin. This became especially noticeable in the past several years with raging inflation. And yet, we do not see any meaningful price correction. Why is that? One possible explanation is the pent-up demand that was driven by large savings. As our government told us to sit tight at home, many households accumulated large savings, and those who didn't own a house decided that the time is right now. The savings accumulation slowed down since then, but it's still at a historic high. Finally, there is some blame that institutional buyers must take in certain single-family housing markets. The corporations and large institutions, they have deep pockets and they can afford to buy a house for cash upfront and later rent it. And that's how they earn their profits. Because of this, the competition and bidding wars only got worse. According to statistics from Redfin, the institutional buyers accounted for 16% in 2021. Compare this to the national average of below 10% for the data since it started getting tracked in 2000. So this was the demand side. Demand will likely stay elevated for the foreseeable future. But what about the supply? The supply in the home ownership market consists of existing homes for sale as well as new homes. And unfortunately, both of them are in deficit compared to the demand. It will take ages to disentangle different factors that are driving this shortage. But here are the few that stand behind this deficit. The data tells us that homeowners tend to stay longer in their residences. According to Redfin, the average homeowner tenure increased from 6.5 years in 2005 to 12.3 years in 2022. The aging population, high rates, and lack of alternatives in case of moving can be the culprits. Also, remote work upended this whole thing. Once people move, they tend to stay put and move less. As you may know, many renters moved out of expensive cities such as New York or San Francisco. They relocated to less expensive states and bought their first homes there. You probably heard about the influx of people to South Dakota, the Carolinas, and New Mexico. As for the new home supply, it's even worse. The restrictive zoning codes, shortages of labor and material caused this whole mess. It was bad before the pandemic. It only got worse. From this graph, we see that the construction of new homes was very much subdued after the great financial crisis. According to Realtor, the gap between single-family home constructions and household formations grew to 6.5 million units from 2012 to 2022. Next, let's take a brief look at the rental market. The conditions there were mildly positive for renters. This is because most rental units there are multifamily. This makes it relatively fast to build apartment complexes that can house many households at the same time. The delivery of new apartment units has been hitting record highs for the past several years. Most of it is in large urban areas, appealing to higher-end renters. But even with that, we see that the dynamic in the rental market is more positive compared to the homeownership one. The next metric to look at is the price-to-rent ratio. You calculate the price-to-rent ratio by taking the house price and dividing it by the annual rent amount. Here's the most recent data from the Smart Asset Study by major US city. Typically, a price-to-rent ratio below 20 indicates favorable conditions for buying a house. A ratio above 20 says that a mortgage is too expensive and it is better to rent. As we see, housing market conditions vary a lot. In principle, it is possible to calculate the price-to-rent ratio in your specific location. You will need to use websites such as Realtor, Redfin, and Zillow to come up with estimates for the average house price and rent in your city. So after seeing all this data, what kind of conclusions can we draw? Should we buy a house? Should we rent today? I would say that it's much better to rent today, given the high premium of home ownership as opposed to renting. And the housing market, the home ownership one, is too hot for buyers. It's not favorable at all. But here are the few tips that I can give you that you can incorporate today while you search for your dream home. First, can you move to a different state where the home ownership market is not overheated? As you saw, the cities in certain states, they still have favorable conditions for home buying. Unfortunately, not everyone can move on a whim. The weather preferences or job locations can restrict moving. Another thing that you can do is to look at your local markets on a more granular basis. The numbers that I showed you earlier were just averages for the entire cities. But cities, they have their own pockets where the price-to-rent ratio is such that it's favorable, still favorable to buy a house. And so you can use the price-to-rent ratio as your guide to that. Unfortunately, doing so may cause you to be in a situation where you have to face certain hard compromises. This could include maybe moving too far out, or maybe not exactly your ideal location, or perhaps the housing options in those locations may be limited, but still this is an option. Next, you can apply for financial assistance from your state if you qualify. Each state has its own Department of Housing and Urban Development. These government agencies can offer help for first-time home buyers. You must have assets and income below certain threshold though. The assistance can include lower interest rates and grants to cover down payments and closing costs. Finally, you can do nothing. Yep, that's right, sit tight and do nothing. This is especially true if buying a house will put you in a compromised position. This doesn't make any sense then. And moreover, the renting option is a much more attractive one right now. Of course, we all want to have our own space and be able to customize our dwelling as we like it. But you will have to delay that day until you are in a situation which is much more favorable to you financially. While you wait, the interest rates might come down. But this assertion has no due date. We don't even know when the Federal Reserve decides to lower interest rates. And likely, even if they do lower those interest rates, it will be in response to something, and that something is likely a recession. And recessions are never good for buying a house. Even if the housing prices may come down, there's risk to you. For instance, you may lose a job and you won't be able to afford even that mortgage. And moreover, the lowering interest rates may compel the buyers who were before that hiding in shadows, lurking there. They will reappear again and start shopping. While you sit tight, there's another thing that you can do, and that is to save more by cutting your expenses, for instance. Saving more never hurts, and if you save more for a larger down payment, potentially you can afford a better option for your housing. And there are different things that you can do. You can look at your expenses on a granular basis, so look at what's really driving them. Is it potentially the too much eating out at the restaurants, or maybe tons of subscriptions that you have, or for instance, rent. Maybe if you're renting, the rent is too high. Can you move to a cheaper location? Or on an extremer end of scale, can you move with your parents, for instance, and live there temporarily? And that will help a lot for your savings for the down payment. As for increasing your income, it's a bit harder. And typically, most people are on salaries, and their salary depends on their employer. But still, with even that, certain things that you can do. Can you improve your marketability? Maybe build a new skill, or maybe change a job to increase your salary. All these things can, even several percent of increase can make a big difference to you. And another thing you can do is to build a side hustle. Of course, all these things sound very easy on paper, but very hard to do in real life. It takes a lot of time and effort, and just generally not easy to do. But still, this is the best thing that you can do, is to invest in yourself. While you wait, the most important thing that you can do is to look at your situation on a bright side. While renting for years is not really ideal for many people, still renting has many benefits and things that you can enjoy, or rather things that you don't have to deal with. For instance, pricey maintenance and repairs on all the stress that you have to deal with if certain thing breaks down in your house and you have to do and stop everything and deal with it on spot. While renting, you can just call your landlord, and the landlord will fix the problem within a day or two. And so this is very important when comparing renting versus buying a house. Moreover, you don't have to deal with the stress of losing your job and not being able to afford that mortgage. So here you go. So while you sit and wait and rent, you can still continue saving and accumulating funds for your down payment. In my view, the only reason to buy a house is for personal enjoyment. While many people tell you that a house is a great investment, is it really true? I strongly disagree with this proposition. Unless you are renting rooms in your house or use part of it as a working office, your house is a liability, not an asset. Closing costs, repairs, maintenance, taxes, insurance, and interest expense can nullify your returns. It is a myth that a house is a great investment. Real estate agents love to recite it. Your house price must grow by a lot, and the timing of your sale must be close to perfect. This is likely true only in some narrow circumstances. Otherwise, owning a house is a liability. That is it for this video. I hope you learned something new today and it will help you to make a better financial decision in the future. Please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more actionable insights about personal finance and investing. With this, that's it, and thank you for watching.